My husband handed me divorce papers and a pink slip in the same manila envelope on the same Tuesday morning in front of 40 employees who used to call me boss. Good day, listeners. It's Vivian Hart here, and I'm 44 years old. Before I continue, like and subscribe and leave your comment. I promise you, by the end of this story, you're going to need to type something out because I certainly did. Let me take you back to the morning everything I built turned to ash. I co-founded Cole & Hart Design 14 years ago with my husband, Daniel Cole, in the spare bedroom of our first apartment. I was the designer. I had the eye, the client relationships, the late nights sketching floor plans until my hand cramped. Daniel handled the books. That was the arrangement. I trusted him with the numbers the same way I trusted him with my last name. By year 12, we had offices in 3 cities and a client list that included 2 hotel chains and a senator's beach house. By year 14, I found out Daniel had been quietly transferring shares out of my name for 18 months, funneling them into a shell company he controlled with his executive assistant, a 29-year-old named Cynthia Marsh. I didn't find out from a lawyer. I found out from a company-wide email. Effective immediately, Cole & Hart Design will be restructured under sole ownership of Daniel Cole. We thank Vivian Hart for her years of service. Years of service. Like I was the receptionist. I stood in the middle of that glass-walled conference room, papers shaking in my hand, and Daniel wouldn't even look at me. Cynthia sat next to him in my chair, at my desk, wearing a blazer I recognized because I'd helped her pick it out at a company retreat, back when I thought she was just an ambitious kid I was mentoring. "You'll get a settlement," Daniel said, sliding a folder across the table like he was closing a deal with a stranger. "It's generous, sign it, and we can both move on with dignity." "Dignity," I repeated. "You're firing your wife in front of the staff and calling it dignity. We're not married anymore, Viv. Not as of this morning." He tapped the manila envelope. "Everything's in there." Everything was in there. Divorce papers, termination papers, a non-compete clause so aggressive it would have barred me from designing a birdhouse within 500 miles of any city we'd ever worked in. I looked around that room at the employees I had personally hired, personally trained, personally covered payroll for out of my own savings during a slow quarter 3 years earlier. Not one of them met my eyes. Fear does that to people. I understood it. I hated it anyway. "You built this company off my talent," I said quietly, "and you're going to run it into the ground without me. I hope Cynthia knows how to read a blueprint, because you never did." Daniel's jaw tightened. That got him. "Good. I didn't cry in that room. I want you to know that. I saved it for the parking garage where I sat in my car for 11 minutes and sobbed so hard I thought I'd be sick. Then I wiped my face, checked my mascara in the rearview mirror, and drove to the bank. My personal accounts were frozen. Every single one. Turns out when your husband is also your business partner and your finance guy, he has a lot of ways to make your life disappear on paper. The house was in his name. The car was leased through the company. I had $412 in a checking account I'd opened in college and forgotten about, and that was it. 44 years old. 14 years of marriage. 14 years of building a company, and I owned $412 and a suitcase. That night, I sat on the floor of my sister's guest room, because apparently that's where you end up when your entire life gets repossessed, and I made a decision. I was not going to fight Daniel in some small-town courtroom where half the judges had golfed with his father. I was not going to beg the old clients for scraps of loyalty. I was going to leave completely. And I was going to build something so big, so undeniable, that Daniel Cole would spend the rest of his life explaining to people why he let me go. Before I tell you about the bus, I have to tell you about the 2 weeks before it, because those 2 weeks were their own kind of war. I tried at first to fight for what was mine the legal way. I called 3 different divorce attorneys. 2 of them looked at the paperwork Daniel's people had already filed and told me gently that untangling shares moved through a shell company would take 18 months and cost more money than I currently had access to, which was at that point $412. The third attorney, a sharp older woman named Diane, was more blunt. "Mrs. Cole," she said, "I believe you. I believe every word of this, but your husband spent a year and a half building a paper trail designed to survive exactly this kind of challenge. Fighting him right now, with no money and no leverage, is like trying to put out a house fire with a water gun. You need time, resources, and documentation you don't currently have. My advice, and I don't say this lightly, is to walk away for now. Build your own leverage. Come back when the fight is winnable." So I just let him win? My voice cracked for the first time since the conference room. Diane looked at me over her glasses. No, you let him think he won. There's a difference. One day that difference is going to matter enormously. I didn't fully understand what she meant until much later. But it lodged itself in my chest and stayed there. My mother-in-law, of all people, called me the night before I left. Daniel's mother, Patricia, a woman I'd spent 14 Thanksgivings trying to impress. I know what he did, she said quietly, like she didn't want anyone in her own house to overhear. I don't agree with it. I raised him better than this. But he won't listen to me, Vivian. He never has. I just wanted you to know that not everyone in this family thinks you deserve what's happening to you. Thank you, Patricia. That actually means more than you know. Where will you go? Somewhere he can't reach me, I said. Somewhere big enough that I can disappear into it and rebuild without him watching every move I make. She was quiet a moment. Good, she finally said. Prove him wrong, Vivian. God knows somebody should. My old employees reached out too, in bits and pieces, mostly through personal numbers, mostly in whispered voice memos they were clearly terrified Daniel would somehow discover. One of them, a junior designer named Marcus, who I'd hired straight out of school, sent me a message that simply read, I know what he did was wrong. I can't say it publicly. I have rent to pay and a family that depends on this job. But I wanted you to know that I know for what it's worth. It wasn't worth much, practically speaking. Emotionally, it was worth a great deal. Knowing I wasn't crazy, that the people who'd watched it happen understood exactly what kind of man Daniel Cole really was, even if fear kept their mouths shut. I gave myself exactly one night to grieve the life I was losing. One night on my sister's guest room floor, a bottle of cheap wine, and every ugly emotion I'd been swallowing since that conference room. The next morning, I got up, washed my face, and started packing. I packed one suitcase, 4 blazers, 2 pairs of good shoes, my grandmother's pearl earrings, and a laptop with 3 years of design files Daniel didn't know I'd backed up to a personal cloud account, because, call it instinct, I never fully trusted him with anything, not even data. I bought a one-way bus ticket to New York City, not a flight, a bus, because that's what $412 gets you when you're starting over at 44. My sister hugged me at the station and said, You don't have to do this the hard way, Viv. Yes, I told her, I do, because the easy way already tried to erase me. I'd rather starve on my own terms than survive on his leftovers. I got on that bus and I didn't look back once, not because I wasn't scared. I was terrified. But I'd learned something standing in that conference room watching Cynthia sit in my chair. Pity is a currency people spend on you right before they close the door. I wasn't interested in being pitied. I was interested in winning. New York swallowed me whole the second I stepped off that bus at Port Authority. 8 million people, and not one of them cared that I used to run a design firm. Not one of them knew my name. There was something almost cleansing about that. I was nobody, which meant I could become anybody. I spent the first 3 weeks sleeping on a pull-out couch in a studio apartment shared with a woman named Renata, a graphic designer I met through a Craigslist ad, because that's how desperate I was. I answered a stranger's internet post for a couch in exchange for $200 I genuinely did not have. I took freelance design gigs off apps meant for 25-year-olds fresh out of design school. I redid a nail salon's floor plan for $300. I consulted on a restaurant's lighting for $600. I was doing 5-figure work for 4-figure pay, and I did every single job like it was for the cover of a magazine. Because I needed references, and references don't care what you used to earn. There were nights I wanted to quit. I won't pretend otherwise. One night in particular, about 10 weeks in, I sat on the fire escape outside Renata's studio, eating cold noodles out of a takeout container, and I genuinely considered calling Daniel and asking for the settlement money after all, just to make the exhaustion stop, just to sleep somewhere that wasn't a pull-out couch with a spring that dug into my hip every night. Renata found me out there, wrapped in a blanket, and sat down next to me without saying anything for a long time. You know, she finally said, every person who's ever built something worth having has sat exactly where you're sitting right now. Cold noodles, bad couch, wondering if it was all a mistake. The only difference between the ones who make it and the ones who don't is what they do the next morning. And what do they do the next morning? I asked. They get up anyway, she said. That's it. That's the whole secret. There's no magic trick. You just get up anyway. I got up the next morning. I took 2 more freelance jobs that week, redesigned a boutique's fitting rooms for a laughably small fee, and kept my head down. Slowly, the work started speaking for itself. A client would recommend me to a friend. A friend would recommend me to a colleague. My name started circulating in small, unglamorous corners of the city's design world, the kind of quiet reputation you build one satisfied client at a time, with no shortcuts and no one handing you anything. By month 5, I'd saved enough to move out of Renata's studio and into a tiny one-bedroom in Queens, 40 minutes from everything by train, but mine. Just mine. I remember standing in that empty apartment, no furniture yet, just bare walls and hardwood floors, and crying again, the third time in this whole story I've admitted to crying, and the last time it was ever out of pain rather than relief. 6 months in, I got a call that changed everything. A boutique hotel in Tribeca was opening its lobby renovation in 18 hours for a major press event, and the design contractor had walked off the job mid-installation after a payment dispute with the building's owner. The lobby was half-finished, exposed wiring, mismatched fixtures, furniture still in crates, and the owner was, according to the panicked project manager who called me at 11 at night, one bad Yelp review away from a heart attack. I said yes before she finished the sentence. I worked through the night with a skeleton crew of 2 contractors I bribed with triple pay and a lot of coffee. By 6 in the morning, the lobby looked like it belonged in an architecture magazine, warm brass fixtures, a sculptural staircase I'd redesigned on a napkin at 2 a.m., a lighting scheme that made the whole space glow like candlelight even though it was all LED. At 7:30, a man walked in wearing a suit that cost more than my old car, trailed by 2 assistants with tablets. He stopped in the middle of the lobby and just stood there, turning in a slow circle, taking it all in. "Who did this?" he asked the project manager. Not even looking at me, because I was standing there in yesterday's clothes with paint on my hands and looked more like the cleaning crew than the designer. "That would be me," I said. He turned around. Late 50s, silver at the temples, the kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need to announce itself. I recognized him a half-second later. Alexander Reyes, real estate mogul, owned half of Tribeca and a good chunk of Midtown. The kind of man whose name got dropped in business magazines with words like visionary and ruthless in the same sentence. "You did this in one night," he said. It wasn't a question. "I did this in one night because a contractor decided a payment dispute was worth abandoning a project and a client's reputation," I said. "I don't do things halfway, Mr. Reyes, even when I'm exhausted and running on gas station coffee." A flicker of something crossed his face. Amusement, maybe. Respect, more likely. "You know who I am. Everyone in this city knows who you are. Doesn't mean I'm impressed by a suit." His assistants both froze like I'd said something career-ending. Alexander just laughed, short and genuine. "What's impressed you then?" I gestured at the lobby. "This. Because I made it happen with 2 guys, a hardware store, and no sleep. That's what impresses me. Results, not reputations." He studied me for a long moment. "What's your name?" "Vivian Hart." "Vivian Hart," he repeated, like he was filing it away somewhere permanent. "I own the building next door. It needs a full redesign, and every firm I've hired in the last year has given me the same tired beige nothing. Can you do better than beige, Miss Hart?" "I can do better than beige in my sleep, which, given the last 24 hours, might be literal." He handed me a card. "Call my office Monday, and Miss Hart, get some sleep first. I don't want your best work. I want your rested work." That was the first time in 6 months anyone had looked at me like I was worth investing in rather than someone to be managed or dismissed. I went back to Renata's couch that morning and cried for an entirely different reason than the last time I'd cried in a parking garage. I called his office Monday. I got the contract. It was the first real money I'd made since New York swallowed me enough to get my own studio apartment, enough to hire 1 assistant, enough to breathe. Over the following year, Alexander became something between a mentor and the older brother I never had. He didn't rescue me. I want to be very clear about that because I know how these stories usually go, and I refuse to let you think some rich man swept in and saved poor helpless Vivian. He didn't hand me anything. He handed me opportunities and then watched, arms crossed, to see if I'd earn them. "You have the talent," he told me once, over coffee in his office. "But talent's cheap in this city. Everyone has talent. What you don't have yet is armor. Someone gutted you once, they'll try again if you let your guard down. Don't let your guard down?" "Duly noted," I said. Also mildly terrifying advice from a man who owns half of downtown. "I earned every inch of it the hard way, Miss Hart. Nobody gave me a head start, and I'm not planning to give you one either." What I will give you is the truth, and the truth is you're better than the firm that fired you. You just haven't proven it at scale yet." He was right. So I decided to prove it. Using the money from the Reyes contract and 2 other projects that came from his referrals, because in this industry, one respected name attached to your work opens 20 doors, I founded my own studio. I called it Hart Co. No ex-husband's name attached. No shadow of Cole and Hart, just mine. Alexander invested a modest seed amount, not as charity but as a business decision, with a contract, with terms, with a seat on my advisory board that he rarely used except to occasionally tell me when a client contract had a clause I should renegotiate. "I'm not your safety net, Vivian," he told me the day we signed. "I'm your sounding board, there's a difference. A safety net catches you when you fall. A sounding board just tells you you're about to fall so you can catch yourself." Understood. Try not to enjoy watching me almost fall too much. "Oh, I will enjoy it immensely," he said, with the driest smile I'd ever seen. "It's the most entertaining part of my week." Hart Co. took off faster than I ever let myself hope. Within 18 months, we'd designed 2 boutique hotels, a private members club in the Flatiron District, and a penthouse for a tech founder who insisted on telling every journalist who'd listen that Vivian Hart doesn't design spaces, she designs feelings. I was building something real, something entirely mine. For the first time in over a decade, my name existed on a company without a man's name standing in front of it. And then, exactly 2 years after I got off that bus with $412 to my name, my new office manager walked in holding her phone like it might bite her. "Vivian, you need to see this." It was an article. A gossip-adjacent business blog with more traffic than it had journalistic integrity, and the headline made my stomach drop straight through the floor. "New York's rising design darling built her empire on stolen work, says former partner." There was a photo of me from a recent hotel opening, smiling, confident, radiant, right next to a photo of Daniel Cole looking somber and betrayed, like I was the villain in his story instead of the other way around. I read the article twice, my hands going cold with every paragraph. Daniel, through a spokesperson, because of course he wouldn't say it himself on the record, claimed that the designs I'd used to build Hart Co. originated from Cole and Hart's proprietary archives, that I'd left the marriage and the company under a cloud of professional misconduct, that an internal investigation conducted by absolutely nobody with any actual authority had found significant concerns about the origin of my work. It was a lie stitched together out of just enough half-truths to sound believable to anyone who didn't know better. And the timing wasn't an accident. My grand opening gala for Hart Co.'s new flagship studio, the event where I'd be presenting to a room full of elite investors, press, and potential Fortune 500 clients, was 6 days away. I sat very still at my desk for a long moment, feeling something in my chest that used to be panic but had, somewhere over the last 2 years, hardened into something colder and far more useful. I called Alexander. "You've seen it," he said, before I even got a full sentence out. "I've seen it. Are you panicking?" "No," I said, and I meant it, which surprised even me. "I'm remembering something. When I found out Daniel was moving shares out of my name, I started backing up everything. Every original sketch, every dated file, every email. I told you I never fully trusted him with anything, even back then. Turns out that paranoia is about to pay for itself." There was a pause on the line, and then Alexander said something I'll never forget. "Good. Then let them come to your gala. Vivian, let them stand in the room they think they're going to burn down. And then you show every person in that building exactly who they're dealing with." "You're not going to help me?" I asked, half joking. "I'm going to sit in the front row and watch you not need my help," he said. "That's the whole point of everything we've built. You don't need rescuing, you need a stage. I can get you the stage. What happens on it is entirely up to you." I spent the next 6 days doing something I hadn't let myself do in 2 years. I went back into the archive of my own life and built a case. I pulled every original dated sketch file from the cloud backup, complete with timestamps that predated my departure from Cole and Hart by years in most cases, because these weren't stolen designs, they were my designs, filed and dated long before Daniel's internal investigation claimed they existed. I pulled emails where Daniel himself had credited me, in writing, as the primary designer on the projects he was now claiming credit for. I pulled bank records I still had access to because I'd kept meticulous personal copies during the marriage, an old habit from growing up watching my mother get financially blindsided by my father, showing the exact dates Daniel began transferring company shares out of my name 18 months before he ever told me. And then I found something even better. An old assistant from Cole and Hart, a young woman named Priya who'd quietly quit the firm 4 months after I left, reached out to me through a mutual contact. She'd seen the article. She was furious on my behalf. "Vivian, I have to tell you something," she said when we finally spoke. "After you left, Daniel had me help him falsify project files. He backdated documents to make it look like certain designs originated with the firm after your departure, specifically so he'd have a defense if you ever came after him legally. I have copies. I kept copies because even then, something about it felt wrong, and I didn't trust him not to try to pin it on me eventually." I could have cried with relief. Instead, I asked her one question. "Would you be willing to say that publicly?" There was a long pause. "He humiliated me too," Priya finally said, "made me work 80-hour weeks, and then took credit for my ideas in front of clients. Yes, I'll say it publicly. I'll say it in a courtroom if you need me to." The days between the article and the gala were the longest of my life. 2 potential clients emailed to postpone meetings, careful corporate language for "we're waiting to see if the fraud accusations stick before we hand you a contract." One journalist who'd previously written glowingly about Hart Co. called my office asking for comment on the allegations, and I could hear in her voice that she genuinely didn't know which version of me to believe yet. Alexander called me the third night, after I'd spent hours on the phone with my attorney going over every document. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Honestly, I keep waiting to feel like I did 2 years ago, like the floor's about to disappear under me again." "And does it feel like that?" I thought about it, really thought about it. "No," I admitted. "It feels different. 2 years ago, I had nothing to fight back with. Now I have a paper trail, a witness, and a room full of people who've already seen what I can build." Daniel's playing the same move twice, expecting the same result. He doesn't understand that I'm not the same woman standing in that conference room anymore. That, Alexander said, is exactly the difference that matters. Don't let anyone talk you into responding to this quietly through statements or lawyers' letters. Words on a press release get buried by the next news cycle in 48 hours. A public reckoning in a room full of witnesses who matter, that's the kind of thing people remember for years. He gave you the stage himself, Vivian. 6 days before your biggest night. Use it. I didn't sleep much in those 6 days. I reviewed every document until the timestamps were burned into my memory. I rehearsed out loud, alone in my apartment, exactly how I'd say each sentence, exactly where I'd pause, exactly how I'd hold my voice steady, even if my hands were shaking underneath the podium. My events coordinator, a fiercely competent woman named Sophia, built the entire technical contingency without asking a single unnecessary question, because by that point, she trusted me enough not to need the whole story. "If they show up," Sophia said, testing the projector connection for the 4th time, "we're ready the second you give the signal." "They'll show up," I said. Men like Daniel can't resist an audience. That's always been his greatest weakness. By the time the night of the gala arrived, I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready. Hart Co.'s flagship studio opening was held in a restored industrial loft in the meatpacking district, floor-to-ceiling windows, exposed brick. 150 of the city's most influential investors, developers, and journalists mingling under warm gold lighting I'd designed myself. Champagne, string quartet, cameras everywhere. I wore a deep emerald dress, my grandmother's pearl earrings, and an expression I'd practiced in the mirror for 2 years without even realizing it, the face of a woman who has absolutely nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. Alexander found me before the presentation, adjusting his cufflinks, calm as ever. "You look terrifyingly composed," he said. "I've had practice being terrified. Composed is just what it looks like on the outside now." Good, because they just walked in. I turned. Daniel Cole in a tuxedo he definitely couldn't afford 2 years ago walked through the front doors like he owned the building. Behind him, Cynthia Marsh, dripping in jewelry, and a woman I didn't recognize holding a professional camera and a press badge from the very blog that had published the smear article. They weren't invited. They'd clearly used a fake name or a +1 loophole to get in, banking on the chaos of an opening night crowd to slip through security. Daniel's whole plan was obvious the second I saw the photographer trailing him. He wasn't there to celebrate. He was there to stage a public confrontation, catch my reaction on camera, and hand the internet a scandal. He found me by the bar within 10 minutes, flanked by Cynthia, that same manila unveiled smile on his face. "Vivian, this is quite the party," he said, loud enough for the small cluster of nearby guests to hear. "Impressive. considering the circumstances. Daniel, I said evenly, not raising my voice at all. I didn't see your name on the guest list. I thought it was important to be here, support a former partner during a difficult time, especially given the questions being raised about the authenticity of your work. He said it smoothly, like he'd rehearsed it, like the small crowd around us was exactly the audience he wanted. A ripple of attention spread through the room. People turned. Phones came up, half recording out of instinct rather than malice, the way people do now at any hint of drama. Cynthia stepped closer, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry. It must be so hard, Vivian, building something like this on borrowed credibility. We just think the investors here deserve to know the truth before they hand you their money? Borrowed credibility, I repeated, letting the phrase hang in the air a moment. That's an interesting choice of words from a woman who borrowed my husband. A few guests near us actually laughed, sharp and startled, before catching themselves. Cynthia's face flushed red. Daniel stepped in quickly, trying to steer it back onto his script. This isn't personal, Vivian, it's business. We simply have concerns about certain projects in your portfolio, and we felt it was our responsibility to raise them somewhere public, given that you've declined to respond to our inquiries. Funny, I said. I don't recall receiving any inquiries. I received a smear article with anonymous sourcing 6 days before tonight. That's not an inquiry, Daniel. That's an ambush. But since you're so committed to transparency, all of a sudden, let's be transparent. I could have panicked. 2 years ago, I would have. But I had spent 6 days preparing for this exact moment, and I had something Daniel didn't. The truth, time-stamped and undeniable. Funny you mention authenticity, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the now quiet section of the loft, because I actually prepared something for tonight. I was going to save it for the formal presentation, but since you're so eager to discuss the origins of my work in front of an audience, let's discuss it now. I signaled to my events coordinator, who'd been briefed exactly for this contingency. The massive screen behind the small stage, originally set to display Hart Co's upcoming project portfolio, switched instead to a set of documents I'd prepared. The room's attention, which had been scattered across 150 conversations, snapped entirely toward the screen. This, I said, gesturing at the first document, is a dated file from my personal cloud archive, showing the original concept sketch for the Wexford Hotel lobby. The project Daniel's spokesperson claims was stolen from Cole and Hart's post-departure archives. Note the timestamp, 3 years before I ever left the company. Note the metadata, my laptop, my account, my design software license. I clicked to the next slide. This is an internal email from Daniel Cole himself, dated 4 years ago, forwarding the Wexford designs to a client with the message, and I quote, "Vivian's vision on this one is exceptional. She should be leading the client call." Funny, since his lawyers now claim I never had creative ownership of anything at that firm. Daniel's face had gone from smug to pale in under 30 seconds. Cynthia's hand tightened around his arm. "This is absurd," Daniel said, his voice cracking slightly at the edges. "You're twisting old emails, Vivian. This doesn't prove." "I'm not done," I said, calm as still water. "This next document is a bank transfer log showing the systematic movement of company shares out of my legal ownership, beginning 18 months before you ever informed me of the divorce or the restructuring, which means for a year and a half you were legally and financially dismantling your wife's ownership stake in a company she built without her knowledge or consent. I believe that's called financial fraud in most states, Daniel. Correct me if the laws changed since I left." A murmur rolled through the crowd, sharp and immediate. Several guests I recognized as investors were already whispering to each other, phones angled toward the screen, recording every second. Alexander stepped up beside me then, not to speak for me, but simply to stand there, arms crossed, a silent wall of credibility beside my own. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His presence alone told the room whose side the smartest man in it had already chosen. "And finally," I said, my voice steady even as my heart pounded, "I have a sworn statement from a former Cole and Hart employee who has agreed to speak publicly, confirming that Daniel Cole directed her to falsify project documentation after my departure, specifically to fabricate a legal defense against exactly this scenario. Her statement, along with copies of the falsified files and the originals, has already been submitted to my legal counsel this afternoon." I let the silence stretch. It was the loudest silence I'd ever heard in my life. "So," I said finally, turning to look Daniel directly in the eyes for the first time all night, You came here tonight to call me a fraud in front of the press at the opening of a company I built from $412 and a bus ticket after you tried to erase me. I think the room can decide for itself who the fraud actually is. Cynthia's photographer had lowered her camera entirely, no longer sure whose scandal she was even documenting anymore. The reporter from the smear blog was frantically typing notes, and I had a strong feeling her next article was going to look very different from the last one. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. For a man who'd spent 14 years being the most confident person in every room he entered, he suddenly looked very small. "Vivian, let's discuss this privately." "No," I said simply. "You didn't do me the courtesy of privacy when you fired me in front of 40 employees, and you didn't extend me privacy when you leaked a fabricated story to the press 6 days before my gala. You don't get to ask for privacy now that it's inconvenient for you." An investor near the front, a sharp-eyed woman named Miriam Osei, who ran one of the city's most respected venture funds, stepped forward with her champagne glass still in hand. "For the record," she said, loud enough for the room, and I noticed several open phone cameras. "I was on the fence about investing in Hart Co tonight. I am no longer on the fence. Ms. Hart, my office will call you Monday." A ripple of laughter and scattered applause moved through the crowd, the tension breaking all at once. Security, alerted by my events team the moment Daniel and Cynthia had been spotted, arrived at exactly that moment to escort them both out. Daniel didn't fight it. He looked for the first time in 14 years like a man who understood he had lost completely and publicly in the exact venue he'd chosen to destroy me in. As they walked him toward the door, Cynthia turned back, mascara starting to streak, and said the only thing either of them managed all night. "Vivian, please. This is going to ruin us. His investors are already pulling out from the new firm. We have nothing left." I looked at her, really looked at her, the girl in the blazer I'd helped her pick out, sitting in my old chair, at my old desk 2 years ago. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not rage, not even pity. Just a vast, quiet indifference, the kind you feel toward strangers you pass on the subway. "I hope you find something that makes you happy, Cynthia," I said, and I meant it in the emptiest, most polite way a sentence can be meant. It clearly wasn't going to be him. Security walked them out through the same doors they'd walked in through 20 minutes earlier, and the party, remarkably, simply continued. The string quartet resumed. The champagne kept flowing. My presentation, when I finally gave it 20 minutes later, was met with a standing ovation that had very little to do with my slides on projected quarterly growth, and everything to do with what the room had just witnessed. By the following morning, the smear blog had published a full retraction along with an apology, presumably after their legal team read my attorney's letter. 3 separate news outlets ran stories instead about Daniel Cole's alleged financial fraud, one of them explicitly using my documents as source material, with my permission. 2 of Cole and Hart's remaining major clients terminated their contracts within the week. I heard, secondhand, that Daniel's new firm folded within 4 months. I didn't celebrate when I heard it, I just kept working. Hart Co. signed 3 new major contracts in the following month alone, including Miriam Osei's fund, which became one of our most valuable ongoing relationships. Alexander remained exactly what he'd always been, a sounding board, not a safety net, occasionally texting me things like, "Told you so," whenever a project I doubted myself on turned into a triumph. Marcus, the junior designer who'd sent me that quiet message of solidarity all those months ago, reached out again a few weeks after the gala. Cole and Hart's collapse had cost him his job along with everyone else's, and he asked, carefully, almost apologetically, whether Hart Co. might have any openings. I hired him within the week, not out of charity, out of respect, because he was talented, and because loyalty, even the quiet, frightened kind offered from a burner phone number, deserves to be remembered when the tables finally turn. He's one of our lead designers now. He still, to this day, keeps a printout of that first message he sent me taped inside his desk drawer. As a reminder, he told me once that doing the right thing quietly still counts even when it feels like it doesn't. I ran into Patricia, my former mother-in-law, at a charity auction about a year later. She hugged me tightly, held both my hands, and simply said, "I always knew." I invited her to lunch. We still get coffee twice a year. Some relationships, it turns out, survive the wreckage of a marriage if they were built on something more honest than the marriage itself ever was. About 4 months after the gala, Daniel called me. I almost didn't pick up. I did, mostly out of morbid curiosity. "Vivian," he said, and his voice sounded smaller than I remembered it ever being. I've lost everything. The firm, the house, most of my savings in the legal fees. Cynthia left. I know I don't deserve it, but I was hoping we could talk. Maybe find a way to move forward. You always had a good heart, Viv. I'm hoping some of that's still in there for me. I stood in my new studio, surrounded by mood boards and fabric swatches for a project that would triple our annual revenue, and I felt the strangest thing. Nothing at all. No anger left to spend on him. No old affection to dig up and offer as comfort. Just a clean, quiet flatness, like looking at a photograph of someone you used to know in another lifetime. Daniel, I said, I hope things get better for you. I genuinely do, but I don't have anything left to give you. Not anger, not forgiveness, not a conversation. You made your choices, and I made mine, and mine led me here. I think we should both leave it there. Vivian, please, Take care of yourself, Daniel, I said, and I hung up before he could finish the sentence, and I never picked up when he called again. 2 weeks later, Cynthia sent a long, tearful email explaining how she'd been manipulated by Daniel too, how she'd never meant for things to go so far, how she hoped we could someday be on good terms. I read the whole thing once. Then I archived it, unanswered, and went back to my client meeting. I want to be honest with you listeners, because that's the whole reason I'm sitting here telling you this story instead of keeping it to myself over wine with my sister. There is a version of this story where I scream at Daniel on that call, where I tell Cynthia exactly what I think of her in a scathing reply email that goes viral for all the right vindictive reasons. I could have done that. Some small human part of me even wanted to, but I didn't need to. Revenge, I learned, isn't loud. It isn't a screaming match in a conference room or a viral takedown email. Revenge is building something so undeniably yours, so solid and successful and entirely free of the people who tried to break you, that they become irrelevant to your life by simple comparison. The most devastating thing I ever did to Daniel Cole wasn't exposing him at that gala. It was closing the door on him afterward, gently, permanently, and never once looking back to see if he was still standing there. Hart Co is, as of this year, one of the most sought-after design studios on the East Coast. Alexander still sits on my advisory board, still enjoys watching me almost fall, as he calls it, though it happens a lot less these days. Priya, the former assistant who came forward, now works as my director of operations, and we've never once discussed what happened at the gala without both of us ending up laughing about it. The good kind of laughing, the kind that only comes once something painful is finally, fully behind you. I bought my sister a house last year. I sent her the keys in a box with a card that said, "You told me I didn't have to do it the hard way." Turns out I did. And it worked. I still have that $412 checking account, by the way. I never closed it. I keep a single dollar in it, just to remind myself, every time I glance at my banking app, of exactly where I started and exactly how far indifference to people who don't deserve my energy can carry a woman who refuses to quit. So here's my question for you. And I really do read every single comment, so don't hold back. Have you ever found the strength to completely cut out toxic people from your life and watch karma do its job? Or did you feel the need to prove something to them? Comment below. I read all your stories.